Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Thursday's Celtic briefing. My name is Ryan McGinlay at the Ryan McGinlay, and today I'm joined by Aidan Macdonald at Aidan C Macdonald. It's Tony's day off, so you've got the young team on today. Aidan, first of all, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yes. Still doesn't feel real to me that Brendan Rodgers is the Celtic manager because we've not had any sort of interviews yet. We've only had statements, a couple of words. I don't know about you. It just doesn't feel real. We just need to get to that point where he's unveiled to the crowd. We don't know when that is. I know we've heard a couple of people saying in the comments we're still not too sure on when exactly that will be. But yeah, we're just waiting. But yeah, it's another exciting day in the world of Celtic, you could say. Celtic are linked with another player, and it's like a new day, a new player, it seems. This time we seem to be going back into the South Korean or the Asian market in the K1 League for the Gangwon FC winger Yang Hyun-Jun. Don't let me butcher that that pronunciation. I think that's the way you say it. Aidan, just right off the bat, how do you feel about this sort of link to this player? What's your initial impressions, maybe after watching him on YouTube, a couple of clips and that?
Yeah, my initial impressions are it looks like a player that would be an interesting signing. I'm glad to see that Celtic are still using the Asian market. I think there might have been a sort of thought that when Ange moved on, it was something they would move away from. But that gives me confidence that maybe all the recruitment wasn't just through Ange. You know, Mark Wall, etc. The recruitment team were also playing a role in terms of bringing players in during Ange's tenure, which is positive because, as we've discussed, we don't want recruitment to suddenly fall off a cliff as it kind of did under Neil Lennon near the end, and also at the end of Rodgers' tenure as well. So that seems positive. Another midfielder, obviously, a sort of attacking midfielder, which looks like somebody that can also play maybe potentially out wide, which is always another good option to have. You can never really have too many forward players because you know what it's like. Hopefully Celtic are going to be playing 55 plus games this season, including Europe. So it's good that there's potentially going to be another option, and it sounds like that Celtic are keen to try and get it done as soon as possible after the reports in Korea, to believe.
Yeah, it seems sort of similar to the way that Oh Hyung-Yu was sort of getting talked about, and then Cho Gi-sung later on as well. There seems to be a credible link. A couple of people seem to be talking about it. We've seen that rumour mill tweet going about last night where a couple of players were linked to European clubs. That boy, I can't remember his name exactly, but he's getting linked with Brentford, the under-20s player. And then another player, I think it was Slavia Prague or Sparta Prague, or one of those teams. But yeah, I've just done a wee fact file on him because I knew we were going to talk about him today. So if you look at his numbers this season, his numbers haven't been great. 19 appearances in all competitions, 1 goal and 1 assist. That's really quite poor. Now, I would caveat with the fact that he's playing for the second worst team in Korea at the moment. They're a team that are fighting relegation alongside O's former team, Suwon Blue Wings. So it seems as if those two teams are struggling. But if you look at his stats in total, 67 appearances, 9 goals and 5 assists for a 21-year-old who's trying to break in the first team. He's only 21 years old, as I've said before. He's an under-23 international for South Korea. One thing that was really interesting, I was talking to Jason Lee last night about this player on Twitter. Unlike O, he doesn't have his exemption, or he hasn't completed his national service. So that could be a potential sticking point with regards to getting him in. He would need to hit the ground running, make the Asia squad, make the South Korean squad, and then win the Asia Cup and that team in order to get granted an exemption. What's your thoughts on that? Would you see that as a sort of red tape sort of scenario?
It could be potential. I mean, it's something Celtic would definitely need to consider before bringing him in, because I believe O had already did his national service. Is that right? Before he'd signed,
Yes,
which is one of the reasons that Ange was so keen to get him in, because he knew he could come in and they would have him for a sort of unlimited amount of time. Obviously, it's one of these things they would have to be considering. Is this a player we could then be losing for a period of time? I'm not exactly sure how long the service is. I don't know on that, but I've
2 years.
Two years, did you say?
I think it's 2 years, but I think there's some exempt. I seem to remember Hyung-Min Son done 9 months or something like that as well. It depends on the player and the sort of situation, but you see a lot of players do it for 2 years.
Right, okay, so it's a period of time then, some sort of 18 months, Jason Lee's saying in the comments. So,
it's a different Jason Lee as well.
It would be, it would be obviously a bit of a blow to then lose somebody, but yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely something that if he was going to be like moving on to do, well, not moving on, but having to go and do national service relatively soon, if it didn't work out from getting in a sort of South Korean squad, so then they wouldn't be eligible to potentially win the Asian Cup, then obviously that'd be a bit of a blow losing him for that long. But so it's something Celtic would also need to consider if he was going to be away for an extended period of time. But you'd imagine if they've been out there scouting him and if they've reportedly made an offer for him, then that's something they obviously are quite comfortable with doing.
Yeah, I've just started a couple of comments. Marquis comes into the comment section and says that Yang's club fighting relegation and want him loaned back for 6 months. They must see him as an important player. He does seem like their sort of designated important player in their team, the way that some of their fans are talking about them, the way that the journalists are talking about him. Just another comment from Pete McGee, who's always in the comments. Thank you very much for joining us. He says that this smacks of the Peter Lawwell days. I just hope that he's had nothing to do with these possible signings. Just feels unlikely that Brendan Rodgers had agreed a deal weeks before Ange left and then set about identifying players. It's just, Aidan, I don't know what your opinions are on this. I would say it's more down to the fact that it's Mark Lawwell just continuing on with the scouting programme that the club had with Postecoglou. I think there's got to be consistency with regards to the players that we go for, and then the final decision goes down to Brendan Rodgers if he sees them as fit. But I think there's got to be a joint approach when it comes to that. I don't know what you think, but I think there needs to be that sort of continuity as well.
Yeah, it's important to have continuity in terms of your recruitment structure. One of the issues probably last time was whether you blame Celtic for the recruitment or Brendan Rodgers, regardless near the end it wasn't good enough. So I think the fact it's Celtic's own person that's in as a head of recruitment rather than Lee Clongerton, who Rodgers brought in the last time, gives you a wee bit more separation. And Mark Lowell, as far as we know at this stage, has been part of a successful recruitment process under Ange since he arrived at the club last summer. So I don't really have an issue with them sort of maybe going ahead and scouting these guys, particularly with Odin, Thiago Home. That was kind of before Rodgers was confirmed. Whether or not the manager signed off in these or not, we're not entirely sure. But I don't know if it'd be exactly the same as back to the Peter Wall days, just given that Mark Wall so far does appear to have a decent track record with recruitment, but need to play it by ear, obviously. If these maybe two players that have been in the pipeline, you don't want a whole transfer window of guys that were on a list under Ange. It's also important that Rodgers gets to bring in his own players, but maybe he's had a look at the data available on these guys, the scouting reports, and he's quite happy that they fit into his plans. Obviously, Tony's got a piece on the site today talking about wingers and how Brendan Rodgers loves basically making them into better players. He's sort of game, his system. A lot of that is based around how successful the wingers can be, and Yang here would be able to fit into that. So maybe he's the exact type of player that we want for the style he wants to play around.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting comment by Jason Lee, and I would agree with that as well. I don't think Abada was an Ange signing. Now, his agent at the time, Abada, I don't know if he switched agents. I think there was a story on that a couple of months ago saying that he had switched agents, but his agent beforehand, or one of the guys that orchestrated his move to Celtic, was Dudu Dahan, who is a now sort of infamous name with Celtic fans due to orchestrating deals for Israeli players and teams playing in that region of the world. Just going back to Yang, back to this sort of fact file that I've done on this player, I noticed that he played both on the left and the right wing. It shows that he's got that sort of what would you call it? That he can play in both wings. He's got that flexibility in the team that he can play on both sides, which would be ideal for covering both positions. So the Gangwon director Kim Tae-ju, it was N Sports that he was talking to, a Korean publication, and I'll just read out some quotes that he said regarding the player. This was translated as, "It is true that Celtic has received a scouting offer for Yang Hyun-Jun. No, we will not transfer Yang Hyun-Jun this summer. I want to allow Celtic to transfer the player to help the player develop. The transfer fee is not a big problem. However, the priority is to consider the current team situation. We also conveyed the position that we would release Yang Hyun-Jun to Celtic for 6 months and then send him to the winter. but Celtic is sticking to the position of wanting to recruit Yang Hyun-Jun this summer. The player also revealed to the club that he wanted to go to Europe. I don't know about you, but there seems to be striking some similarities to the O deal as well. The fact that the player is desperate to go to Celtic. It seems as if the player's really keen to make that move. Are you a fan of this sort of pushing for moves that these players seem to be doing? Obviously, Gangwon need to cover themselves. They're in a relegation battle. But what's your view on the player trying to not force a move, but make it clear that he wants to move to Celtic?
I mean, I can understand his prerogative. Obviously, it's playing in a higher quality league, more profile, European football, potentially latter stages of not latter knockout stages of European football. Celtic can improve a wee bit this year, which would then maybe give him more of a profile to try and get in the national team. So I can understand why he would be sort of maybe pushing, like you say, maybe pushing for him is the wrong way to word it, but wanting to sort of move on to Celtic. In terms of players actually doing that, it's good when you hear about it's a player that you try to sign, but if it was obviously a player at Celtic trying to do it, you might not be a fan of it. So I suppose it's kind of just all relative depending on what situation your team's in that regard. But it does show you that the Asian market's obviously been very fruitful for Celtic so far. I'm sure the players in Asia have seen how well a lot of the guys have done, like Kyogo, Awata, etc., Maeda, Hatate. So I'm not really surprised that he's keen to come in, given how a lot of the imports have been pretty successful so far.
Yeah, it's definitely encouraging, and like we touched upon before, I think it's enlightening to know that Celtic are still scouting that Asian market despite Postecoglou. The main reason that we were scouting and signing players was because of Postecoglou and that link to the Asian game. Because he'd obviously managed Yokohama, even the Australian teams as well, being in the sort of same part of the world, the same side of the world, they'll have links to the players. So it is good that they're not letting go of that, and it's good that Mark Lawwell is still scouting these players actively. In terms of, we'll stay on Yang and we'll stay on right wingers for a minute. Obviously, Yang's main position would be on the right wing, which is a position that Jota has played last season. Abada's played there the last 2 seasons. Just on Abada, what is your general opinion on him? Do you think that Abada will be staying around at the club, or do you still see him as one of the players that will maybe move despite Brendan Rodgers coming back into the team, back into the side, Aidan?
I'd like to see him stay. His goals record, his assist record's very impressive, particularly this season when his minutes were a bit more limited. Just the way at the end, I mean, you can maybe read too much into these things, but just the way he sort of was after the Scottish Cup final, maybe it was to do with Ange moving on more than his own personal circumstances. I don't know, but it sounded like he was potentially the sort of player that could be moving on. Obviously, the transfer window isn't long open. There's not been any concrete sort of links so far to him, but I think there's arguments with the data behind Abada, etc., that if you did get a decent offer for him, maybe in a similar ballpark to what you got for Juranovic, etc., maybe a wee bit more, that given his age and that, and maybe some of the sort of frailties in his game, it would be worth selling him. But I just think his goals and his assists have been so important. I'd like to see him stick around for another year. And I think he falls into the category of somebody that Brendan Rodgers could improve. The way he sort of worked with James Forrest previously, Patrick Roberts, players who there is ability there, but they're maybe a wee bit raw in some of their attributes. I think Abada would fall into that category, and I would be interested to see him work with Rodgers. But yeah, like I said, it was just after the Scottish Cup final, I kind of maybe had a wee bit of a inkling that maybe he was going to move on, but it could have been to do with just the fact that Andrew's obviously leaving. Maybe that was playing into his thoughts rather than his own personal situation. But if there was a chance for him to stay, Ryan, I would be pretty happy with that, to be honest.
Yeah, he's certainly a fan favourite. And just before we continue, just if I could direct everybody to the ticker tape at the bottom. If you want any more top quality journalism from myself, from Aidan, from Tony, we've got analysis pieces from Stuart Ross, tactical pieces from Stuart Ross, analytical pieces from Alan Morrison, James Daly, Duco James. So if you want to have a look and subscribe, just visit www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. Just talking about the wingers again, maybe talk about Jota for a wee bit. The fact that he was obviously playing right wing for a lot of last season to accommodate Maeda on the left hand side. Maeda's defensive qualities cannot be be questioned. It's more of his attacking side and some of his actual footballing ability probably, but his effort can never be questioned. Do you think next season, now that Brendan Rodgers is the manager of the club, do you think that Jota will be reverting back to his favoured position at left wing? Now that I don't want to call Maeda sort of teacher's pet or anything like that, but he was certainly one of the favourites when it came to Postecoglou. Do you think that Jota will now play as a left winger, and that will maybe leave space for a right winger to come in, such as Yang or Abada can step up?
I mean, I do prefer Jota on the left wing. I think in his first season you've seen that, and there was a lot of debate about whether or not it was better the campaign just past his first season. I was of the opinion of, despite him having maybe a longer spell out with injury in the first season, I thought he was a wee bit more effective just on that left wing. He can do a job in the right wing, I mean, particularly domestically. You know, if you're in a home game, I don't have any issues with Jota starting on that side if it's sort of to accommodate someone else or because of the injuries or whatever. It is good to have players that can play across both wings. Haksabanovic fits into that. Yang would potentially fit into that if he was to sign. So, but I think it's better to have him over on the left line. Now, where that pushes Maeda out, I don't know. Once again, he's not a player I'd be wanting to see leave the club if it could be avoided. I think he's got plenty of positive attributes, and you know there was discussion about how Harry Kewell had sort of improved his technical ability. You'd imagine Brendan Rodgers will be able to bring him on again in that regard. Yeah, as Kevin Ferrer's saying there. It was Maeda's already himself discussed how sort of working one-on-one with Kewell, who is obviously staying at the club as part of the coaching staff, has improved his game, and you'd imagine Brendan Rodgers will be able to take him to another level if there's sort of maybe some one-to-one coaching going on. But I would be quite happy if he was to stay as well, Ryan. I know, as Derek Smith saying in the comments there, it's his first touch, and it is something that lets him down. You know, for every time that he scored that goal away to Motherwell last season in the sort of counter-attack, it was a brilliant first touch and a goal. For every one of them, there can be 3, 4, 5 when the ball goes out the park, they just can't control it. But we know what Maeda can do, and I think particularly for the Champions League, his pressing ability is some of the best I've seen, to be honest. I know he'd maybe got other attributes that are lacking a bit, but the way he can press the ball, and I'm just talking about football in general, is very, very effective. And I think if somebody we were to lose, I think it'd be hard to replace him, to be honest, Ryan, in terms of he's been able to press and his defensive attributes. Understanding a Brendan Rodgers team, particularly domestically, that's maybe the last thing on the team's mind, but I think he's a very effective player for European games, particularly away from home. And if he was to move on, I'd be looking to try and get somebody who has somewhat pressing ability. Whether or not that's possible, I don't know.
I think with regards to Maeda, and I think you'd agree with me, you've got to take the rough with the smooth with him.
Yeah.
He's very, very good at some things, but he's severely lacking in other points. His first touch can be a bit of a nightmare, so can his wayward shooting as well. Brown Warrior comes in here and he makes a decent point. Now, Maeda scored obviously against, I think it was Peru he was playing against the other day. He says that I think Brendan might be tempted to deploy Maeda in the role he plays for Japan and Europe. His pace on the counter against sides who presses with a high line is set up for a player like Maeda. Just with regards to the rough with the smooth, do you think that Brendan Rodgers could deploy him in that role in Europe just as a counter-attacking force? There might be times when Celtic don't have a lot of the ball, but then they can break with the ball quickly. I know his first touch can be a bit of a mixed bag to put it lightly, but do you think that could be an area that Maeda plays going into next season under Rodgers?
I think it's a possibility, Ryan. It is interesting that role he's played for Japan, like you say, getting his goal the other day. He also scored for Japan at the World Cup as well. I think he is quite effective in that position. It could be an option. I mean, you'd imagine that if Kyogo or O was fit, they would be sort of leading the line type thing, but maybe that's something Rodgers could do in terms of tweaking for in Europe, which I think he might have to do slightly for his tactics and if he wants to be effective. So that could be interesting to see. And that's maybe another reason, not that, that's maybe one of the many reasons that it's worth keeping him around, to be honest, because he can sort of fulfil a number of positions. But it will be interesting. Like I say, I would be, like Abada, I would be expecting that if we were losing players like that, you're going to be getting very effective replacements come in. Now, Yang might be one of them in terms of Abada, but I think the profile of Maeda is difficult to replace somebody like that. I think he's a very specific player in terms of what he can offer, and I think regardless, even though Postecoglou's not there anymore at Celtic, I think we would miss him over the course of the season if he wasn't there. I just wanted to say, it's in the comments, Tony's Winners piece that he did, that's available on the site today, just discussing how Rodgers had previously, developed players like Sinclair, Roberts, Forrest. What could he do for Jota, Maeda's we're discussing here, Abada, Haksabanovic. So that's in the comments. Just if people haven't seen that, it's available on the site just now.
Yeah, just as the sort of last thing when we talk about Yang before we get on to a different sort of topic. When I was speaking to Jason Lee, the Korean journalist that covers Korean football, he gave me sort of a short overview on the player, just to get everybody sort of excited on the sort of player that we would be signing if that move was to happen. So he messaged me back saying he's easily one of the most exciting prospects in Korean football. Quick, technically excellent, and fearless in the way he plays. Would be a top signing for Celtic. Let's see what happens at the Asian Games first, though. Unlike Yang has yet to win exemption for his military service. Just from those comments, Aidan, he does sound like a really exciting player that Celtic should be going for, and it's good that we're shopping in that market again. At 21, it seems like the sky's the limit for him.
It does, yeah. I mean, hearing that from somebody who's obviously experienced covering the game in South Korea, knows their stuff is always positive when you're scouting a player. You want to hear good things about him. I think everybody's, or the majority of people have probably watched the YouTube compilations, which, as we've discussed, Ryan, you can never take too much from. But when you see a player doing well, that always gets you a wee bit excited. But, we've been bird with Marion Shred before, so can't look too much into that. But in terms of his stats, I know you were saying this season it's maybe not been his best, but clearly his team's struggling, given that they're the bottom of the league, and it can be difficult for a creative player in those sort of circumstances to be effective. So, no, I'm from what I've seen so far, I'm pretty happy. I think he could be a good addition to the squad. I understand people's concerns about, is Rodgers involved in this recruitment, but as I think it was Kaiser said in the comments, it's important that Celtic don't just rip up all their sort of recruitment into other markets just because Andrew's moved away. And as much as the manager should have final say for the most part on players, this is probably a product of, you do have your own recruitment person in there that's not connected to the manager. He's brought in before Rodgers returned to the club. So, there has to be some sort of structure outside of the manager. I'm not suggesting that Mark Wall goes out and buys all 8 players without speaking to Brendan Rodgers, of course not. But I don't think necessarily just because this player might have been somebody you were looking at before Rodgers came in, that it's somebody you should give up on.
Yeah, there's got to be that continuity. Now, I know that we've been linked with another midfielder in Odin Holm as well. Hopefully, later on today, I'll be able to speak to somebody who is an expert on that sort of player, on the player in Norwegian football. So we've been linked with a midfielder and an attacking midfielder / right winger, left winger, wherever he wants to play, wherever he's suited for Brendan Rodgers' style of play. Just as a sort of general point, do you think there's any glaring positions that Brendan Rodgers and his scouting team need to be identifying for next season?
I think goalkeeper, to be honest, Ryan. I know Tony and I have discussed that before. That's where I would be very keen for Celtic. Yeah, Jason, he's saying that as well. I would be very shocked if Celtic didn't sign a goalkeeper, and no disrespect to Joe Hart, but I'd be quite disappointed if we weren't, investing a decent fee on a goalkeeper this summer. A really quality player, I think, is needed in there, not just with the ball at his feet, but also from a shot stopping capacity as well. In Europe, I think you do need a top goalkeeper really for a team like Celtic to try and do anything. You're going to need a bit of luck in some matches, particularly against the top teams, and you need a goalkeeper that can have that big performance. I'm thinking like, Fraser Forster against Barcelona, for example. Probably the obvious one that comes to mind, Fraser Forster against Lazio as well. Just bring back Fraser Forster, but I think it would. I think it's important that they invest in a goalkeeper. I'd be personally making that Celtic's number one priority for recruitment this season. Really, if I was in any sort of recruitment position, I just think that it's so important for how the team want to play. And like I say, I'm not trying to have a go at Joe Hart. He's been a good servant for Celtic. He came in, steadied the ship after a really poor season for goalkeeper. Probably one of the poorest you or I can remember in terms of Celtic goalkeepers. So there's definitely a place for him. I know he's still got a year left in his deal. His experience in the squad's invaluable. So I'd be more than happy for him to be there as a number 2 and still be speaking to the squad. Whether or not Joe Hart would want to stay as a number 2 is obviously a separate discussion. He may feel he could get first team football still at a decent enough level down south championship, lower championship maybe. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think goalkeeper would definitely be my priority.
Yeah, and I've made the point previously that Celtic should be scouting maybe South America for goalkeepers that are good with the ball at their feet before they get tapped up by teams such as Benfica, Porto. I know there's that. If it's Brazil to Portugal, there's not that language barrier. Obviously, the two nations speak the same language, but I think looking at it as a more general point, I think more and more goalkeepers are now expected to play with the ball at their feet. I don't know about you, but it seems as if every young goalkeeper that's coming through, if they can't play with the ball at their feet, they won't make it far, or they won't make it at the elite level in the game. Do you think there's any other sort of nations apart from maybe South America? I know that's a continent. That's a sort of generalisation. I think there's any other nations where goalkeepers maybe should be scouted? France, Spain, Italy, etc. Maybe the lower leagues in there, because as a goalkeeper, a young goalkeeper is a completely different age to a young outfield player. You would say. You'd still say a 24, 25-year-old is basically a baby when it comes to goalkeepers, due to the fact that they're playing until they're 40 nowadays. Do you think that Celtic should be scouting in these areas, maybe Western Europe, maybe the Balkan countries as well, for young goalkeepers coming through?
Definitely, I think you should be expanding your sort of scouting network really far and wide, given the financial resources Celtic have got at their disposal. I wouldn't be averse to them looking in a variety of places. In terms of just some of the countries you mentioned there, Spain, France, Italy, it's always difficult given the top 5 leagues in those countries to sort of be looking at the top tiers, even if it is somebody that's near the bottom. If those leagues, it's just in terms of wages, in terms of attracting them to move from that league to Scotland, regardless of this Champions League football, it is difficult. So, I mean, I wouldn't be averse to Celtic looking there, but it might be kind of too much of a saturated market in terms of being able to sign somebody. But I think South America, you touched on, is definitely an interesting one. Obviously, the obvious examples are Ederson and Alisson, both Brazilian, both phenomenal with the ball at their feet, particularly Ederson. I mean, he sometimes is like, he could almost be playing in midfield. He's so good with the ball at his feet, but I wouldn't be expecting us to get somebody at that level, obviously. But I think we'll keep noting in South America would maybe be an option. Across Europe, of course. I can't really think of individual countries at the moment because I've not really been looking at scouting profiles for goalkeepers or anything via Y-Scout, but I definitely think that goalkeepers got to be a position that Celtic prioritise, and I'd be hoping they'd be willing to spend significant money in that position as well. Understand money doesn't guarantee success. Barkas is obviously a obvious example of that, but I'd be wanting Celtic to basically be making that a priority, really. Well, obviously, I hope we sign more than 3 or 4 players this summer, but if you do only sign a few, one of them's got to be a goalkeeper from you round.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that game against St Mirren last season was a big sort of indicator to me. We can see the sort of maybe the sort of the decline happening before it really happens. Those 2 shots that Joe Hart let in from Curtis Mean respectively, they were shots that maybe he should have saved and maybe would have saved 2 or 3 years ago, maybe
Even the year before,
6, 7
maybe,
years.
might have
Yeah,
saved them even the year before, so...
I think you've got to take it on a year-by-year basis with goalkeepers, but especially at that age, you'll maybe see the downgrade. I know we've seen on the other side of the city a goalkeeper downgrade, and they've obviously went out and got a younger goalkeeper to sort of alleviate that stress. But it definitely is an interesting position. Like you say, I think if there's one position that we really need to spend money on in the summer, it's that. Now, I know we've had our fingers burnt before with regards to Vasilis Barkas. We spent $5 million on him. There was a lot of factors that went into play. Yes, I know he had a really bad spell at Celtic, but we were so close to getting Fraser Forster. We were kind of led down the garden path by him. We had to get a quick replacement. But I wouldn't let that situation put us off spending that sort of money for a goalkeeper in the future, because I think if you get a young goalkeeper that's hungry, that's desperate to play games, that can make these big saves, that can be the difference between finishing 4th in a group or finishing 3rd and getting to the Europa League and finishing 2nd, getting to the last 16. Goalkeepers keep you in games. Strikers score goals that make you win games, but goalkeepers will keep you in a game if it's at a deadlock. I think it's so important that we at least have a look at that position. If we maybe even bring in somebody as a number 2 that can learn under Joe Hart next season, if Joe Hart is going to be the number 1, and then the season after that, he can come in and maybe stake his claim. Just as we sort of wrap up, just quickly talk about Gavin Strachan. Obviously, Gavin Strachan has been linked with a couple of managerial jobs over the past couple of years. The latest one seems to be League Two Shrewsbury, who put in 2 offers for him. The reports seem to speculate, but he has rejected both of them in order to stay with Brendan Rodgers and his new look Celtic team. What does that say about Gavin Strachan and the fact that he's had these opportunities to leave the club, but he still wants to stay and work under Brendan Rodgers, this new sort of team, especially after the reported interest from Postecoglou. How good is it for you knowing that Gavin Strachan is desperate to stay and be a part of this new side?
Yeah, it's exciting. It obviously shows you he's enjoying working at Celtic. He's always been sold on what Brendan Rodgers has said to him or what Kennedy said to Strachan about working with Brendan Rodgers. He's obviously been excited about that. He seems like a good coach, Gavin Strachan. The fact that that's 2 managers now that have been happy to have him around, 2 top managers that we both, I'd imagine, think very highly of. The fact that they rate him is pretty positive. He's obviously doing good work behind the scenes. I know during the COVID season he was somebody that took a bit of flack, as really everybody did, and it was something that was probably undeserved, to be fair. But him and Kennedy seem to be really positive on the training pitch. And at any opportunity would always be wanting to praise Kennedy, always wanting to praise Strachan and his other backroom staff, and he's clearly an important part of what Celtic are trying to do. So no, I'm really happy that he's staying, Ryan, because I think continuity is important to an extent, and the players will be comfortable with his training. If we're hoping that a good chunk of the squad are going to stick around for this upcoming campaign, I know Celtic might lose 1 or 2. That's just what happens, but they're just his training. It's obviously effective. The training's making the players better as well. So no, I was pretty happy to hear that he's sticking around.
Yeah, it's definitely good. I don't know about you, but it feels as if the situation with regards to the backroom staff is completely different than when Postecoglou came in. It almost seemed as if Postecoglou was forced to have these backroom staffs, whereas it seems that the narrative nowadays, or in recent weeks, is that Rodgers wants these people around at the club. He's desperate for them to stay around for that continuity, as you mentioned, Aidan. It seems as if Rodgers has got what he's wanted with regards to the coaching staff. He's got people that know the club, that have been there for years. He's got Kennedy. I think it's important to also mention that Kennedy is going to be assistant manager under Brendan Rodgers. He was always just a coach. He was only promoted to assistant manager when Lennon came to the club permanently. So, it is good to see that continuity still exists. I think he was a bit of an easy target during the COVID season. I think when people seen him with his laptop sitting there with the laptop or the tablet, it was sort of an easy target to sort of direct anger to, because I feel like everybody was angry in that season, the way the team was playing on the pitch. We were looking for somewhere to direct it off the pitch. But by all accounts, he seems to be really, really highly rated. So it definitely is good to see him stick around. Just quickly on John Kennedy, how do you feel about him staying at the club? I know he's been linked with the Spurs job or the Spurs assistant manager's job. How enlightening is it and refreshing is it to see that he's stuck around?
Yeah, I was pretty happy to see Kennedy sticking around, to be honest. I know there was a sort of narrative of maybe it was better for him to move on. For his career potentially, he's maybe done it. People thought maybe he did everything at Celtic. And look, that's fair enough, but clearly Kennedy was an important part of being successful under Ange. And if he's going to be credited with maybe things not going well, part of the reason things didn't go well in the COVID season, then he's also got to be given a lot of credit for things going well under Ange, it going well under Rodgers in terms of coaching. So, no, I was happy to see Kennedy sticking around, Ryan. I think we are used to just managers in general bringing in the whole new coaching staff when they go to clubs, particularly down south. It is a thing that regularly happens because managers are so often sort of moved on and then all the staff are let go as well. But it doesn't always need to be like that. And I'm pretty happy that all the coaching staff are sticking around, or they're all sticking around at the moment anyway. It just shows you that Brendan Rodgers, they're very impressed with what he's done. I'm sure Kennedy's probably explained a lot of that, Stevie Woods as well, given that they worked under him the last time. And it's obviously, I do wonder if it wasn't Brendan Rodgers, if it was like a European coach or somebody we didn't know as much about, would they have stuck around? I don't know. But they're obviously very happy with what he's got on offer, which should only be a positive for the upcoming season.
Yeah, it's great to see that continuity still exists at the club, and that Brendan Rodgers has got what he wants first time around. I know he tried to take those coaches away from us the first time around, but it seems as if he'll be keeping them around this time when he's at Celtic. Aidan, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a really good discussion on all things Celtic. We seem to be in a ray of positivity just now. We've announced our new manager. We're linked with players. We're still linked with Asian players, which have brought us so much success over the past couple of years under Ange Postecoglou, and now hopefully under Brendan Rodgers, if those deals go over the line, regardless if it's in the summer or it's in the winter. Just before we go, like I said at the start of the video, or midway through the video rather, if you want to support us in what we do, then visit www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. Get top quality content, news content, analysis pieces, tactical pieces, the lot. So it's really good content on that. So if you're interested, then please subscribe. But all that's left for me to say is, Aidan, thank you very much for joining me.
Cheers, mate. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow. Cheers.